The Atlantica Airlines plane takes off smoothly from Los Angeles Airport, its engines humming against an azure sky. The vibrations of the turbines seem to dissipate the tensions that still hang in the air, while the clouds spread like an infinite sea, soft and calm. On board, passengers sit comfortably in their seats while waiting for the flight to New York. The muffled sound of conversations, bags closing, newspapers unfolding, and phones vibrating, creates a quiet, almost family atmosphere, a moment suspended between two worlds. The smell of fresh food, meals served on neat trays, mixes with that of coffee emanating from the kitchens, awakening the appetite and the senses. The cabin crew moves with almost choreographed precision, and the dim lights cast a warm glow throughout the cabin, making the atmosphere welcoming. Among the passengers is Kofi Samuels, a black man in his 30s, with an imposing but refined physique. He wears a dark, tailored suit of understated elegance, and a silver watch that clicks subtly against the sleeve of his shirt. The watch is not there to brag, but as a testament to his journey. It symbolizes years of hard work, sacrifice and dedication in a world where men like him are often seen as exceptions rather than rules. Kofi is a businessman in the field of finance, a sector where positions are expensive, and where, despite his success, he has never been able to escape the feeling of being an outsider. A stranger in a world he has come to understand, but which still views him through a distorted prism, a world where the color of his skin seems more salient than his skills or intelligence. He sits near the window, his eyes lost in the clouds, contemplating the vast blue sky. His thoughts are overwhelmed by business, unreturned calls, upcoming meetings, and the constant pressure to succeed. He is tired, mentally and physically, but he is also determined. The relative comfort of a long-distance flight is often the only moment of respite. However, that day, a slight unease came over him, as if, beyond the obviousness of his suit and his neat appearance, he still carried within him an invisible burden. It was that familiar feeling, that unspoken tension in the air, that people like him often feel, without ever being told they weren't welcome. A feeling that Kofi had learned to ignore, but which inevitably returned, like an insistent echo. The flight attendant, Amber, a young white woman with platinum blonde hair, crosses the aisle with a quick, determined gait. From her first visit to the cabin, it is obvious that she is in a bad mood. His smile, although forced, is welcoming, but it lacks warmth and humanity. Amber distributes blankets and drinks with almost mechanical efficiency, but her movements lack the fluidity one would expect of a professional in her field. From time to time, she glances sideways at the passengers, as if analyzing their status, their appearances. His eyes linger on certain faces more than others, on certain silhouettes that seem not to correspond to his idea of a luxury traveler. Kofi notices the way her eyes rest on him, a moment too long to be mundane, as if she's assessing the legitimacy of his presence on this first-class flight. Kofi observes the scene in silence, a mixture of distrust and weariness invading his mind. He feels a tension in the air, but he can't explain it, like a dull sensation that seeps into his being without him being able to identify it. Perhaps it is the heavy atmosphere that has settled around him, or the impression that he often has, in each place he goes, of not being totally accepted, of being only a guest in a world that is partially open to him. After all, he was just another passenger. He should have felt like everyone else, light and anonymous, but something in the way Amber looks at him awakens an old unease, a reality he can't escape. Kofi learned to be discreet, not to attract attention, to blend in with the crowd. His goal is not to shine, but to survive in a world that expects him to prove his worth at every moment, beyond his qualifications or his successes. But this flight, this seemingly banal moment, was going to transform into something unexpected, unforgettable. Because in a furtive gesture, almost imperceptible but too heavy to be ignored, he sensed that this trip was not going to unfold like the others. A shiver runs down the back of his neck, and he slowly turns his head towards the window. The sky remains as vast as before, but something has changed in the air. Something he can't yet understand. Amber at that moment walks away, but Kofi remains suspended in his uneasiness, as if this innocuous moment was going to be the prelude to a bigger event, more difficult to ignore. The journey to New York had just begun, but it would soon be the scene of a confrontation he had not anticipated. A few hours after takeoff, As the plane experiences light turbulence that causes the cabin to shake slightly, Amber walks toward Kofi, her face tense, her gait quick but precise. At this moment, Kofi is immersed in his work, reading a company report on his phone. He holds a cup of coffee in his right hand, the warmth of the drink momentarily warming his fingers, a small burst of comfort in the immensity of the flight. The purring of the engines and the whispers of the passengers seem almost distant, as if everything around him is fading away, leaving only his thoughts and the numbers scrolling across the screen of his phone. But Amber, who is walking down the aisle with a determined expression, suddenly stops in front of him. His voice, firm and dry, breaks the calm almost too suddenly. "Excuse me, sir, could you fasten your seat belt?" she asks dryly, without even a smile. Kofi looks up, slightly surprised by the harshness of the request. He had barely noticed that the belt was no longer visible under his coat, but he had no intention of causing trouble. "I tied her up, thank you," he replies politely, not looking away from his phone. He prefers to avoid conflicts, especially in flight, where calm is precious. He's not in the habit of challenging authority, but he already senses an acerbic tone in the way Amber addresses him. Amber, however, seems to lash out at the slightest opportunity. She stares at Kofi for a moment, as if waiting for a different reaction, then her eyes land on the cup of coffee he holds in his left hand. The disdain is palpable in his gestures. She then declares, with a touch of condescension that makes the air around them shudder, "You can't drink coffee without wearing your seat belt, sir. We're not in a cafe here."
The words resonate like a judgment.
Kofi feels a shiver of embarrassment run down his spine, a feeling of unease that invades him. He looks up at her, trying to read her face, to understand if it's arrogance or simply a lack of professionalism. "I assure you that my belt is securely fastened," he says, in a calm but firm voice, with an insistence that he hopes will be enough to remove any tension. But Amber, relentless, seems determined not to leave him alone. She takes one last disdainful look at the cup of coffee, as if this little beverage would somehow challenge the order of things. Without another word, Amber quickly walks away, heading towards the other passengers without paying attention to Kofi. He tries to refocus on his report, but his mind remains disturbed by this interaction. He's used to controlling gestures, to more subtle forms of racism, but this meeting with Amber seemed different. It was as if she had fixed herself on him, not for a simple safety rule, but to assert a power that had no clear justification. Before he has time to fully collect his thoughts, another passenger, a man in his 50s in a suit, remarks out loud, visibly amused by the situation. "I didn't see the hostess intervene so harshly with the other passengers," he said with a mocking smile, turning to his neighbor. The light tone he takes contrasts with the heaviness of the atmosphere, and a small murmur of assent is heard among a few other passengers. But Amber's reaction is instantaneous and dazzling. The usually icy look she gives Kofi transforms into a glimmer of fury. Without saying a word, she returns to him, and in a movement as sudden as she is unexpected, she slaps him. The violence of the gesture surprises everyone. The sharp sound of the slap echoes through the cabin, amplified by the silence that immediately follows the impact. It's as if the whole world freezes, each passenger overwhelmed by the inconceivable. The sound seems to hang in the air, heavy with astonishment. Kofi, stunned, remains frozen for a few seconds, unable to understand what has just happened. He feels the stinging pain on his cheek, his mind too shocked to react immediately. Then, slowly, he stands up, his eyes fixed on Amber with a new intensity. His hand instinctively places itself on the swollen cheek, as if to soothe the physical and psychological humiliation that has fallen upon him. He seeks to regain his calm, to face injustice without giving in to the instinct of anger. "Are you crazy?" he whispers, barely able to realize the extent of the incident. His voice trembles, not with fear, but with that strange combination of confusion and indignation. Amber doesn't even seem affected by what she just did. She stares at him with an icy gaze, her face impassive, as if this was all just a simple behavioral adjustment, a simple necessary correction. Without a word, she gives him one final cold reply. "Go sit down and stop making a fuss." The words ring in the air, heavily, like a warning bell. But Kofi, although his mind is boiling, chooses not to respond with violence. He is bigger than that, and more than ever, he is aware of the gravity of the situation. His hands grip the armrests of the chair with silent determination. He stands up calmly, his dignity intact despite the public humiliation. "I'm going to report this incident," he said finally, his voice firm, determined. The look he gives Amber is that of someone who understands that he can't let this go. His words aren't just a threat, they are a promise, to himself and to all those who, like him, find themselves reduced to the violence of injustice. The murmurs of the passengers, discreet at first, begin to intensify, gradually transforming into a cacophony of agitated voices. Everyone seems to have an opinion to share, but some prefer to remain discreet, their eyes avoiding witnesses to the incident. Others, more daring, discreetly take photos with their phones, capturing every moment of this unexpected scene. Murmurs turn into louder discussions, where terms like unacceptable, humiliation, and discrimination are repeated with increasing frequency. The contrast is striking. The plane, which until then was a bubble of relative intimacy, is now an arena of public debate, almost a microcosm of society, where racial, social, and power tensions seem to burst into broad daylight. The passengers, usually immersed in their own concerns, all find themselves affected by the shock wave that shook the relative harmony of the flight. It was then that a woman in her 40s suddenly stood up, her face marked by indignation. She looks at Amber, the hostess, with an intensity that could not be ignored. "This is not acceptable. You cannot treat a passenger like this," she shouts loudly, increasingly enraged by the blatant injustice she has just seen. She then walks quickly down the aisle, her heels clicking against the floor. "I'm going to talk to the commander about it. I'm going to file a complaint," she says, not paying attention to the stares she attracts. She heads straight for the cockpit, glaring back, where several passengers stare after her, their eyes full of compassion mixed with frustration. Kofi, who has remained strangely calm in the midst of this tumult, feels a surge of conflicting emotions. Although shaken by the slap, he never intended to let the situation escalate. However, he now knows that this attack is not just an isolated incident, but a reflection of something much larger, and he does not intend to let it happen. He stands slowly, his movements measured, as if he's taking every second to think about how he's going to deal with what's happening. He then approaches another member of the crew, a stewardess who seemed to have observed the scene with a neutral gaze, but who now seems to understand that something much more serious is happening. "I want to speak to the commander," he says, his voice surprisingly calm despite the anger brewing inside him. "What this woman did is unacceptable. She physically assaulted me, and I plan to report this incident." The stewardess nods, realizing the seriousness of the situation. She rushes to alert the officials on board, and within minutes, news of the incident reaches the cabin crew. The commander was informed of the situation, and a ground team was contacted to prepare to welcome the plane at New York Airport. An atmosphere of gravity settles among the crew, everyone aware that a simple theft is about to turn into a major media incident. Upon landing, the New York airport is bustling. Social media has exploded with videos of the incident, captured by passenger witnesses, and hashtags relating to Kofi's assault are spreading at lightning speed. Journalists have already invaded the entrance, forming a cordon around the arrival gate, ready to pounce as soon as the plane lands. Images of the incident, shared and commented on thousands of times, began to circulate online, amplifying the scope of the scandal. Kofi, as a central figure in this media storm, is escorted by airline officials, who appear both concerned and committed to handling the situation as professionally as possible. Amber, for her part, is taken to the other side of the airport under surveillance, her face devoid of any expression, frozen in a kind of denial or shame, depending on your point of view. When Kofi steps off the plane, he does so with quiet dignity, despite the humiliation and anger boiling inside him. He stands straight, his gaze fixed, avoiding getting carried away by the pressure of the moment. Camera flashes crackle around him, while questions come from all sides. Journalists, as hungry for answers as they are for images, crowd around him, ready to obtain the slightest statement. "Why did you decide to file a complaint?" asks a reporter, microphone extended towards Kofi. The question, almost predictable, seems to flow naturally from his lips, but it is charged with an expectation that he cannot ignore. Kofi takes a deep breath, closing his eyes for a split second to collect his thoughts. The silence that settles around him is almost palpable, each spectator hanging on his lips. Then he opens his eyes, and in a calm but strong voice, he responds. It wasn't just a slap. It was a racist act. A gesture of contempt for who I am. It's not just me, it's for everyone who, every day, suffers this kind of treatment. Because it's not just a question of a woman who hit me. It's the symbol of an entire system, of an entire society that thinks we have to be silent in the face of injustice, because we don't look like what they expect. This is not just for me, it is for all those who, in the shadows, experience these humiliations, but do not have the platform to denounce them. His words float in the air, carried by emotion and conviction. The cameras, the journalists, and even a few passengers who have gathered around, listen to him in silence. It's no longer just about his personal incident. It represents something bigger, a call for justice and fairness in a world that sometimes seems to ignore them. In the days following the incident, the echo of the attack was felt nationally. The scandal takes on an unexpected scale. Newspapers and online news sites are saturated with reports, analyses, and debates about the nature of the attack suffered by Kofi. The media echoed growing popular anger, and commentators were quick to label the incident as a symptom of deep-rooted racism in society. 24-hour news channels broadcast interviews with passengers, civil rights activists, and experts who call for reforms in airlines and in society as a whole. The country is entering a phase of collective reflection. Protests, large and small, are taking place in many cities. People are taking to the streets, united by the same desire to denounce not only Kofi's aggression, but also the impunity that too often protects those who abuse their power.
Signs, slogans, songs of resistance invade public squares.
Groups of civil rights activists, airline industry workers, but also ordinary citizens are marching side by side to demand justice. The protests are accompanied by passionate debates on social networks. The hashtag Justice for Kofi is going viral, generating thousands of posts, articles, and videos where voices are raised against the systemic discrimination that undermines society. Public figures, celebrities, activists, and even some politicians are beginning to join the conversation, supporting Kofi and demanding fundamental changes. Comments and testimonies are pouring in from all walks of life, proving that this incident resonates well beyond the boundaries of personal racism. He has become a symbol of the fight against institutional injustice. The ensuing trial became a major media event. It's a shock to the entire country, a moment when citizens are waking up to the magnitude of racial problems and how they are often ignored or downplayed. Kofi, supported by a team of civil rights lawyers, is taking legal action against the airline, but also against Amber, the stewardess, whom he accuses not only of physical assault, but of systemic racist behavior. The trial is not just a legal battle, it becomes a symbol of resistance against hatred and the fight for human dignity. Amber's defense lawyer argues the isolated incident theory, attempting to downplay the seriousness of the action by arguing that it was a one-time error, a poor judgment, a misdirected moment of frustration. But the video evidence is overwhelming. Every second of the filmed scene is an accumulation of tangible evidence that the attack was neither an accident nor an impulsive reaction. It was a calculated act, motivated by a sense of racial superiority that crossed a line that no profession or social status should justify. Kofi testifies on the stand, his voice strong and calm. I want the world to know that this was not just a mistake. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an act of violence motivated by hatred and racial superiority, he said, each word resonating as a call to collective conscience. His testimony, without hesitation, without hindsight, becomes a key moment in the trial, capturing the attention of the public and the media, and adding weight to the cause he defends. It is not only his personal fight, but that of all those who are victims of discrimination, whether visible or invisible. Amber, whose initial arrogance has given way to a face marked by shame and humiliation, is suspended from her duties. The trial verdict, although partially favorable to Kofi, does not put an end to the reflection that has begun in the country. Far from being a simple legal victory, this episode becomes a turning point in the way society perceives racial injustices, both in the private and public sectors. The trial not only highlights individual acts of violence, but opens the door to a much broader reflection on business ethics, the social responsibility of employers, and the need for structural reforms in airlines and beyond. The debate on education on racism, on the importance of developing a culture of inclusion and equality within institutions and society, is becoming central. More and more voices are being raised to demand racism awareness programs and training on unconscious bias in sectors where inequalities exist. Companies, particularly those in the airline sector, are being forced to reevaluate their policies for managing racist incidents and implement stricter preventive measures. Months after the incident, Kofi realizes that what he thought was a simple personal injustice had a much deeper impact. He begins to receive letters of support from all sides. People of all races and social classes wrote to him to express their solidarity and gratitude. The letters are not limited to words of compassion, but are also testimonies from those who, like him, have witnessed or suffered from similar situations, but who never had the chance to be heard. These letters are a constant reminder for Kofi that what he experienced is not an isolated case, but a phenomenon that affects a large part of the population, especially those who, in the shadows, fight for their dignity. As the groundswell of support grows, Kofi realizes he started something bigger than himself. It wasn't just a slap he received that day. It was a collective awakening for a country that has too often turned its head in the face of racial injustices, whether visible or not. He understands that his fight is far from over, but he is determined to continue what he started. During a television interview, Kofi expresses the full weight of this awareness. "I stand so that others can stand," he said, his eyes full of conviction. "Because this is not just my fight. It is the fight of everyone who does not have the chance to be heard. It is not just a question of justice for me, but for every individual who, every day, suffers in silence under the weight of racism and injustice. This is not a personal battle, it is a battle for the soul of our society." His words resonate across media and social networks, a call to action that inspires thousands of people to stop being silent and fight for a more equitable society.